computer and
ready to go. Hi, I'm Wayne Jacobsen, one of the authors of A Language of Healing for Polarized Nation. I'm joined with my co-authors Bob Prater and Arnita Taylor. And I want to welcome you to this live session, a Zoom session, talking about Chapter 10, Willing to be Disruptive. And our moderator today, our guest, Tracy Levinson, author from the hill country of Texas, wrote a book called Unashamed. Hopefully she's working on some others, but we've been friends for a long time. Tracy, the room is yours. Have fun.
I'm excited because I love this book, A Language of Healing, and I love this chapter. This is a topic that Arnita and I have discussed for years, and I'm excited that we're going to be addressing it. And so just real quick, if you would, Bob, what are a couple of the topics you guys have already covered? Just name like a couple of them.
well, we've covered compassion. We've covered sharing the table. There's a few.
And this is kind of a hot topic,
Yes.
being disruptive, right? Because you're talking about a language of healing. And so what I would love to do is start with Wayne. And I'm going to...
This is not my favorite chapter. That's not fair, but go ahead.
That's why I'm starting with you.
Yeah, great. Okay, good.
I mean, I love this topic. So
Okay.
I'm going to ask you to define for us, from your perspective, what being disruptive is.
Yeah, we battled this as we were writing it and wished we'd had a different title on the chapter, because disruption alone is not always helpful. I think we're trying to talk about positive disruption, which basically means we're disturbing the comfort of the status quo in the name of truth or justice to move a better point along than just people going along with the way things are when things need to be changed. So disruptive is the honesty of that moment, or what you do to draw attention to the fact that something needs to change.
And so being disruptive, another word for it that Arnita and I use a lot is the word catalyst, oftentimes by being disruptive. So
no, I love that word better. We should have used that word.
no, it's all good. I love it just the way it is. But Arnita, why was a chapter on being disruptive or being a catalyst necessary for this discussion? Why did you, because I know you were probably the driver behind that.
I love the word disruptive. I love the word disruption and disruptive. I think it's necessary to put anybody in a position to take an intentional risk to get a different outcome. But of course, I'm a coach, and so development coaches know if you don't disrupt something, you never move toward change. Now, normally there is a catalyst or something that precipitates to make you go toward that. But I think disruption, I never default to disruption having a negative connotation. I always think it has a pretty positive connotation. We talk about personal disruption. Often with the word disruption, people look at external things rather than looking at internal, which is very, very common. In A Language of Healing, we're asking you to disrupt some personal paradigms, personal beliefs, some personal values. We're asking you to do that first in lieu of looking external first. So it's necessary for growth and movement.
I did notice that when I was reading the book, that there was such an emphasis on that this is a personal journey for you to really challenge yourself with. Okay, Bob, where have you been disruptive in your life and a catalyst necessary? You know, where has that happened for you in your life where that's occurred?
Well, first of all, we can certainly, I mean, I just want to go back to what you asked before, because there are certainly some negative connotations to disruption. I mean, Adolf Hitler was pretty disruptive on the earth in a very negative way. But you're right. We're looking at this from the positive. And so where have I been personally disruptive? I think when I began to be vocal about spending time with people who were different, LGBTQ, a lot of gay folk, and that goes back 40 years for me. And when I became pretty public about that, there were those that did not understand. Probably the most disruptive thing that I've done was partnering with a Muslim leader to do the podcast, A Christian and a Muslim Walk Into a Studio. That has literally cost me friends and a lot of it's opened the door for misunderstanding. But then disruption is always going to have cost. So, it's one we gladly pay.
I feel like all three of you probably have your own story with that. Bob, Arnita or Wayne, do you have a story that's happened to you where being disruptive cost you something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it does. It costs. But for me, I think the outcomes of being disruptive are so much more favorable than the cost. It may cost me being misunderstood or judged or ostracized. That's okay, as long as I'm going more toward my personal conviction and commitment to go toward change. And so that it's really personality driven. I'm okay with losing some things. I think some things you need to lose. Some things you lose aren't a loss in Jesus' name. So I have a more positive outcome there. Of course, just being a female pastor in a male-dominated world, man, talk about disruptive on top of being an African-American female. So my whole life, I think God looked at creation and said, let's create this disruptive character that likes 12-inch afros and that's just bold and loves me, and let's just go do it. Let's go disrupt the world, literally. So yeah, it's all good though. It's all good. If I look back over all the times that I've grown and people I've met, I wouldn't know you, Tracy, if I wasn't disruptive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
all right.
I like what you said. I think I look at a lot of positive things come out of it. There's nothing that I've spoken up about, been disruptive about, that I look back and regret. But I have lost employment. I've lost friends. I've lost a whole lot of income that was supposed to be mine just for standing up for what's true and what's right. And to me, at the heart of being disruptive, when I look at Jesus, which is where I drive a lot of my example for life, he didn't come to the world to be disruptive. He came to bring the truth, and the truth was disruptive, and he was just the vehicle of that. And so I look at my life when I've had to stand up for someone or stand up for myself, or at times make a better case for the gospel than the one that we've religionized and perverted over the years. Yeah, there are people who get very disturbed when their status quo is disturbed, and they want to pull out all the stops. And so marginalizing a friendship, discrediting you, gossiping about you, lying about you, excluding you, all the things that Jesus said in Matthew 5. Count it blessed when they lie about you, exclude you, do all that. Count yourself blessed. And it doesn't feel blessed at the time, which I think is why we have to count ourselves blessed. But I agree with Arnita. There's no place I have gone there that I regret later, even though it's painful in the process. Yeah.
If I may make a comment, one thing that we understand is when you're disruptive, if you don't take that disruption, because that's something that is an internal struggle before you actually make the disruption, and Arnita made that point in the book, you're really going through an internal struggle because you know this is the road you need to take. So again, when you look at what it costs, you go, do I want to live with that uneasiness, with that unrest? Or do I want to take the chance to go and make this stand, to make this statement, to start the podcast with someone that's untraditional for a Christian to talk with? And when you know that is the right thing to do, that's why you're okay with it. That's why you're okay, because you don't want to stay with the internal struggle.
No, I appreciate you saying that, because you're right. In the book, on that chapter, Arnita did talk about how oftentimes when there is a disruption, it feels like it's kind of out of the blue, or it feels this strong thing, but really the person's been mulling over this for a very long time. I did appreciate that. That's such a good point. Okay, Arnita, I have a question for you. I know that you're a scientist. I know you are interested in the brain, and I'm a teacher, so I come from it from a teaching standpoint, but I'm really curious about people that have a tendency to not want to be disrupted and want to just keep going. They want to repeat their habits, or they want to be with like-minded people. And it's just easier to do what you've always done, or what your parents did, or think the way you've been taught to think. And so what role do you think the brain plays in the resistance to any sort of shift or change or disruption?
Well, you know, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'm not going to pass that off. We all have access to an article that we read. Now, the thing that I know is the brain does help you compartmentalize it. And so the more you compartmentalize and put it in there, the harder it is for you to bring it up and change it. So I do think, I think I probably should add here.
Hey, we lost you for a second.
We're not catching that, Arnita.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. That's what I'm saying. Y'all keep going because I can't. I'm in a hotel room today, unfortunately. I'll if it's just edit it out. Some of the stuff with the brain stuff, it's okay if you don't want to change. I think that needs to be said. Everybody does not have the personality or the grit to be so disruptive. Actually, most people would rather not be in most things. The reason this chapter has such a contextual place in a language of healing is because in order for you to speak a language of healing, yours personally, you're going to have to disrupt some things because you're going to have to stand up for people and your brain is just going to throw you down. I mean, you're going to have to wrestle with it. It's the internal struggle, as Carolyn was talking about. So it's really not optional to speak a language of healing and not have your brain challenged on new paradigms and new thoughts and being growth-minded. Those, if you cannot see those as partners, you won't be able to speak a language of healing because you'll always come from the place you know, even though that's a very limiting place. My thing with that is I always say, if you want to be that person, just be quiet most of the time. You don't have to say so much when you really don't want to try and understand and go in a direction to heal rather than harm.
That's good.
I think I would like to add to that, if that's possible.
Yes.
Well, my background is in mental illness. I'm Jovan. We introduced each other, but my education is in mental illness and counseling as well. And what I've seen as I take my theologic background and then your mental health background is some of these things do like intertwine and play. In other words, when you would talk about someone leaving the status quo, that would be akin to leaving a role in life. And in counseling or in these circles, we talk about leaving a prominent role can be like a great source of depression, a great source of anxiety. So it's really important that people that are called out from among them are spiritually and mentally healthy. And oftentimes you'll have the path that leads to the path of where you break the status quo. And on that path, God is preparing, chastening, refining you so that you are able to do and break away in a way that's healthy. But I noticed for my path, I wasn't mentally, emotionally, or spiritually healthy before I started breaking the status quo and before I started becoming a disruptor. So it actually kind of like compounded my issues, which is something that we don't talk about a lot. Because once I got out, now I'm dealing with rejection. Now I'm dealing with anger. Now I'm dealing with angst. And on top of that, I haven't taken the time to relive or look at my story as I went along. I haven't been able to process my hurts. So I'm out here disrupting, but I'm angry. And I haven't dealt with that. And so even though I say that's the path that God called me to, which I know it is, there's still these moments where I've seen.
We lost you, Joe.
Oh, am I gone?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
You're back again.
But just when you're talking about mental, emotional health, spiritual health, which we just like to call getting healthy in the kingdom, being healthy, you also got to be ready for that path, because when you go on it, if you haven't been taking care of business, it's going to show even more by the way you disrupt and the heart and attitude that you disrupt in, which can cause more damage along the way, because there's collateral damage. Our families, our friends, there's collateral damage to the paths that we take if we're not following the prompts to the release gate, so to speak.
It's pretty good.
Amen.
That's good. So along with that, Bob, tell me a little bit what your thoughts are about the difference between peacemaking and doing a healthy disruption. Like, what would be the difference? Because oftentimes people resist a good change, but they'll resist it because they'll say, well, we need to keep the peace. So What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, peacekeeping is not peacemaking. And there are people who are interested in keeping the peace when literally that means at any cost. We just, be quiet. That's the old adage, shut up and sing, or now we hear shut up and dribble. Just do what you're here to do, entertain us, do what you got to do. But peacemaking is an action word. And if we're going to truly be disruptive, we have to do so from the construct of peacemaker. It has to be that just like a cabinet maker makes cabinets or a winemaker makes wine, a peacemaker actively makes peace. So that's as clear as that's my clear understanding of it. I don't know if everybody else sees it the way that I do, but peacemaking is part of disruption. I mean, and I'll throw something controversial out, when Colin Kaepernick knelt for the national anthem, which he has taken a lot of heat for over the years, it was basically to draw attention to part of our society that was not at peace. He was the ultimate peacemaker at that point, as he began to bring attention and shine a light on what was happening systemically across the country.
Wayne or Arnita, do you have any words on peacemaking?
No, I'll toss it out to the rest of the group.
I would jump in on that one.
Let's see what they have to say.
Come on, Paul.
So I heard a great saying this week from a friend of mine, and he said, agreement is a cheap form of unity. Agreement is a cheap way to achieve unity. I really like what Wayne said. It's not necessarily about being a disruptor. It's about speaking truth. So agreement is, I'm just going to shut up and not create any waves here. But unity is, no, we're going to fight through the mess of this thing together to get to truth on the other side. And so I just really loved that saying and thought it went well with that idea of peacemaking is not just, hey, let's keep the peace. Peacemaking is let's actively walk through these conflicts and messes together to get to the real truth and the better place on the other side of it. And that's real relationship.
Yeah, and I would add in peacemaking, the problems you mostly have is with your in-group. We've talked about that in previous chapter, difference between in-groups and out-groups. Your in-group has a certain agenda that they want, and when you step up to speak for someone else in another group, which may be an issue of truth, like we've already talked about, it may be an issue of injustice. And people you know closely, people you've been with for a long time, they want to shut up. Let's not stir up the hornet's nest because we've got what we want. And so I think a lot of the disruption that comes relationally comes when the group that you're a part of doesn't want to speak up on someone else's behalf, doesn't want to be aware, doesn't want to deal with it. And then it's easy to point the finger, oh, you're just a troublemaker, you're just a rabble-rouser, you're that kind of thing. I want to introduce Kayla Cotton in the room. Kayla's a friend of mine, 21-year-old, who's really dealing with a 21, 22, something like that. I don't want to get your age too wrong, Kayla. But
23, actually.
23 now. Wow, gosh, we've been at this a while. My does time.
No, we have.
Anyway, she's a sexual assault survivor. I don't know what she wants to share about that, but she's also really taken on the legalities and laws and prosecution in her state that almost makes sexual assault victimized yet again by the state and by the process. And so she's active with the legislature, with some of the prosecution. Kayla, I don't know what, you are a real disruptor, and you're one of my heroes when we talk about this, which is why I asked if you could join us, because I love dealing with the physical struggle you deal with, and yet willing to insert yourself into some very, very disruptive ways for the cause of justice, for not just you, but other survivors who will come after you. Can you talk, what's on your thoughts today as we talk about this?
Yeah, well, I'll share a small snippet of my story. I was assaulted in 2018. I was a college student, wasn't a member of a college. I was living off campus. And as a result of speaking up, I lost my entire college community. I was a part of many on-campus groups. I was kicked out of those groups because fear of they gave many reasons. And I ended up going from being a successful college student to being homeless and in a shelter simply because I had been speaking out. One of the things that totally transformed why I was doing it was about a month after I'd reported more women began to come out and speak that they had been victims of this perpetrator as well. And I began to realize that this was much bigger than me, that this was something that I needed to speak on, because the oppression of survivors overall is so great. And so I decided to lose my anonymity and speak out to the press. That led to then working with legislators. I spoke last week in front of my state government about a bill, and I will begin doing that again this week. I have lost friends. I have lost tons of connections. Pretty much my entire life, it was gone. But the realization that I was speaking truth and I was becoming a voice for people who had previously never had that voice became the thing that fueled me. I realized when I had 50 survivors after I did my interview message me and say, thank you, I'm now going to speak out because you're the first person I've ever seen speak out like this before. And now I'm going to publicly share my story. I realized that I wasn't just speaking for myself. I was speaking for a whole group of people, and that there was an issue of oppression within this group of people. And through that, one of the things that I've had to learn, to go back to what you're saying, I had to realize that I had to fight that battle within myself, that I had to become okay with myself, that I had to learn my own value and learn what I wanted to do. Because some days I get calls from Commonwealth attorneys and I get chewed out. Some days I get messages saying, I hope you get assaulted again. I hope you die. And I have to be able to handle that, or else I'm going to break. So I can't be totally broken mentally and going into this and speaking out, or else I'm just going to crumble. And then my work will then no longer be able to be sustained. And so really the thing that I think stood out to me was people don't want to know the uncomfortable truth. And this goes to anything: religious circles, racial issues, sexual assault, any of these things. I went to a Black Lives Matter protest in June, and I had several people say, I will no longer respect your advocacy because you are speaking out about these things too, and you're getting involved in this politics. And I began to realize that speaking the truth, no matter what that is, standing up for the people who don't have a voice, it comes at a price. But the thing that makes it so worth it is when you see that person who has carried a burden for their entire lives, and they are crying and they tell you, it's the first time in my entire life that I've ever felt heard. That price is worth it just for that one person, much less the hundreds of other people. But that one person saying that makes all of that sacrifice worth it.
Wow.
Awesome.
You are super articulate. That is just a beautiful message. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Wow. Okay, I have a question for anybody who wants to answer this, but so being disruptive, whether that's personally, it could be in a personal situation, somebody could be in an abusive relationship, it could be a systematic thing culturally, but when does that go too far? Like, when do you think, what does that look like when it goes too far? What are the elements of it? Does anybody want to chime in on that?
I like what Javon said earlier about when you let anger get in the way, when you let other things get in the way, you might be going too far. But the problem with, I think, disruption that we're talking about today is almost always the restraint is not to go far enough. There's not enough out there going, hey, you're going too far. Most of it's trying to restrain it. And so finding the freedom, to me, it's got to be, is my engagement productive? Is it moving something forward? Even if it makes people uncomfortable, and even if they're resistant, do I feel like it's moving something forward? Then I don't care how disruptive it gets. I don't care what personal price I suffer. But you notice almost, and I think a lot of this, because we're taught language of healing is really aimed at the kind of personal interactions we have. You know, in a personal interaction when the person has shut you down, and you can keep talking, but they've stopped listening. And my sense is once I've made someone defensive, I've got to lay back a little bit, invite them back out, because defensiveness only makes them protect their weakness even more, their bondage even more. So for me, that's a going too far. It's a limit. When I see them get real defensive, I'll just kind of back off. I won't soften what I'm saying, but I'll kind of take the pressure off of them. I may even say something like, I might be wrong here, even though I know I'm not, but I might be wrong here, just to give them some breathing room. Because if the person, and I just really don't want you to, when the person you're talking to is no longer being benefited by the conversation, then you're just harassing them. And in the long run, that's not going to be helpful.
So
Wayne, to go on to that really quickly, I think one of the things in any conversation or in any type of thing that you are doing, asking the question of yourself, what am I trying to achieve? And am I just blindly following what I'm wanting? Or am I being in tune with what is needed? I feel like speaking up, yes, you are speaking up, you are disrupting, but it's also an ebb and flow of when to back off and when to know when to push, and to know, especially when you're working with people one-on-one, to learn within yourself. This is why having healing, having good mental health yourself is so important, because sometimes you might get all into it, but then you're going to need to back off and respect that person's space, let them have that breathing room. So just to go off of that.
Good.
I have a question for anybody who's in the panel right now, and I'd love for you to say your name if you're okay with that, at least your first name. What in your life has been something where you feel like you've been a disruptor? What kind of issue, and what did that cost you?
I chose to I'll just give you one. I'm just a certified disruptor. I have been since I was like born. And that caused me hardship in my family. I was raised in a extremely repressive religious arena. It was like you couldn't wear dresses. The women couldn't wear dresses. The men couldn't do this. You couldn't do that. So I began from a young age studying the scriptures and kind of pointing out what was wrong about it. So from there, that as a child costed me the assurance that parents give their children, because I was always the one making everyone uncomfortable. So I dealt with a lot of rejection from that. And that was really hard to deal with as a child, because I'm like, why aren't they accepting me? I found out this information. The thing about wisdom and knowledge is when you get some, the first thing you want to do is say, oh my gosh, I got this grand revelation. I need to take it to all my people. I need to take it to the whole world. This is going to be fantastic. It's going to be a parade. We're going to do great things. And then you go, and then you start to realize, oh, wow, this truth, it causes division on its own without our help. And this caused me so much pain, because it actually left me not feeling comfortable as a child and not feeling safe for the ideals and stuff that I think God himself was really giving me over the course of years. So it left me with brokenness with family. So now it's hard for me. I get nervous when people ask me questions that I know the answers to now. So there's kind of a fallout from it. Like when I'm with my family and they say, what do you think of this? Everyone in the family has already agreed on what they've chosen to believe. And I know that it's wrong. It's, not to be arrogant, but I know this one. I know this one. And this one's wrong. So then they're like, well, what do you think? And I'm like, oh God. And it's like, man, I wish I had a Snickers. So, because I'm not myself and I'm uncomfortable. But I say it anyway. And so it continually causes me, I never really get comfortable in my relationships. I never get comfortable unless I'm around people like me, which I don't want to be tribal, but it's the truth. And sometimes when I'm around people that aren't, I turn into someone I'm not. So there's been some fallout from just rejection as a child and having certain information.
That's really helpful to hear. Anyone who's been a disruptor can relate to what you're saying. That's helpful. Okay, anybody else have a story of being a disruptor? What was the topic?
Gotta hear from Hannah.
I don't know if this is the question for me, but I mean, I am more of like a subtle disruptor, I think. And I try to make a pretty big impact. Like if I see an issue, I more quietly kind of fight for it. Like when I was in college, if there was some kind of disadvantage on a certain group of students, I would advocate for them. But I wasn't necessarily doing it like on social media and really publicly, but I would go talk to the professors and figure out like what we could do to make, you know, a more just system. Like an example is I became friends with a lot of refugee students at my school, and they were getting like 30s on their papers because they're being asked to write a paper in a language they don't speak fluently. And if I was asked to write a paper in a language I don't speak fluently, I definitely wouldn't get a 30, I would get a 0. And so I kind of took and spearheaded and started talking to my professors and saying, like, how can we make this to where they're being judged more on their abilities and not just like exactly what you're asking them to do. And so we kind of were able to hook up a system where they were in touch with the writing center, and there was like different levels of helping them write their papers so that what they were trying to say came across and they weren't being judged on their grammar. They were being judged on the content of their paper. So like things like that, if I see an issue, I kind of try to go after it, sometimes in a more subtle way. Because in my experience, there's some things that need a big disruption, like huge systematic issues need really big disruptions. And then there's other things that may need a more subtle and a more personal disruption. It may not have been really helpful or beneficial to anyone if I went on social media and I was like, these professors are giving these students 30s on papers, but if I went and talked to them about them, it was more helpful kind of in the long run.
That's good.
I really
I
like
love it. I love that you say that, because we need to understand, as we talk about not being polarized, don't be polarized with disruption. There's many levels of disruption, which is why I wanted you to speak. You're a social worker, a master level social worker. You are out there disrupting. You're dealing with it in families, institutions all over. It's hard for people to resist making the very word polar. There's so many levels of it. You know, this is one thing that I see right now. It is disruptive to most people to let people have their own narrative. That is a problem, America. That is a problem. I'm just trying to make it, I'm trying to keep it right down here so we're not trying to change the whole world. If you find you are torn up when you cannot let someone have a narrative, a personal narrative different than yours, then you are struggling with disruption. You're struggling with it.
I think one point to go on that, Arnita, I think that's a very great point. I think one of the things that my biggest goals in what I do is giving a voice to each person that I interact with, whatever that may be. Because a lot of times people have lost their voice on a personal level. And so sometimes sometimes it does need to be that big, disruptive, kind of loud thing. And sometimes it needs to be that quieter, sometimes that's needed more. But I think the goal isn't to shove every perspective that I have onto every person that I'm interacting with, but to explain what and being like, hey, I might be wrong on it, but giving them room to be able to grow within themselves and see it for themselves and then develop their own voice, not forcing my agenda on them.
So Paul, I have a question for you.
Sure.
What made this topic of interest for you today? Why did you want to be on this call?
Well, I'm a little like Jovan. I think I always say I was born the kid in the Emperor's New Clothes story. Whenever the crowd is going one way, I'm always like, wait a second, what about this? And so my wife and I just have sort of become disruptors in our lives. And we were both preachers' kids. We grew up in this very conservative, political and religious evangelical environment. And in our marriage, we started to see like, hey, maybe there's another way to look at the Bible than through sort of this politically conservative construct. And I ended up planting a church. She ended up running for mayor of our city. And in both arenas, we're like, okay, we're going to change this. We're going to bring sort of this new idea into the church and the civic arena. And so every time that I started speaking this out, somebody would leave our church, or, and it ultimately, you know, you asked what it cost. It ultimately cost me the leadership of the church. I ultimately stepped out in big part because of this, because people would come and say, can I buy an American flag to put on the platform? And I would say, no, when we're in church, we're citizens of the kingdom of heaven, not of the kingdom of the earth, you know. And my wife, in her sphere of the civil government arena, when she was getting into it, she was sitting down with some leaders of her party. And she said, I've been working with this person from, and it happened to be somebody from the other party. And we're like, we have these great ideas of what we're going to do. And she said, they looked at her like she had a third eye in her forehead. Because to work with somebody from the other party was so foreign to them. And even they began to tell her, like, if you do anything that allows the person from the other party to get any credit whatsoever, then they're going to get voted in again, and a million more babies will die. You know, that was the statement that was made to her. So the idea of being a disruptor and saying, hey, what if the parties work together for solutions instead of fighting each other for power, was such an unbelievably corrupt concept for them. And so for both of us, it did cost us our community, our village, and but it just gave us this whole new territory of a reconstructed life where we're getting to meet people that were never in our bubble before.
Carolyn, did you have a comment? Oops, we lost you.
Yeah, no, I'm here. Yeah, I was just, again, taking in what everybody's saying, and I'm shaking my head, yeah, with everything. But one thing, when you think about it, depending on, as an African-American woman, I never sought out to be disruptive, but just walking in what God has called me to do. And many times I'm the only African-American in the room. I'm the only director that's in the company. I'm the only one that's in the class. And then just speaking my truth. It feels disruptive to everybody else, but to me, I'm just living my life unashamedly, you know, with no apologies, not trying to blend in, but just being a very confident African-American woman that has a specific call in her life from God that is completely outside the norm of what you would expect me to do. It feels disruptive to everybody else, but I'm like, I'm here. So I hope that everybody that's watching this and that's reading the book, and if you haven't read the book yet, I'm going to encourage you to do that. A Language of Healing. There it is. Get the book, because this chapter should help everyone to say, I am going to be me. If it's disruptive, I'm going to take the courage to do that. You don't have to go out there and cause fights and cause, you know, riots and cause picketing and demonstrating. Just live your life. And if you're following what God has called you to do, and many times it's going to be disruptive. Otherwise, he wouldn't call you to do it. It would be your normal path.
That's good. Yeah, I'd like to jump onto that, because one of the key components to being disruptive is courage. It takes courage. And, you know, whether it's your velvet glove approach, which, you know, I love that disruption takes on so many different forms. I'm the guy that is loud and says, hey, wait a minute. And then there's you who goes and does what you do. But both take courage. They both take courage. We count the cost, and then we go and we disrupt with intent and with purpose.
I love what you said, Carolyn. I love people who are disruptive, not by intention. They just live in their life out loud, and not in a manipulative way, but just being who you are in the world can be disruptive. It's more the restraint not to be. It's more we get, you know, let's keep everything quiet. It's always that kind of restraint. If we could ignore that a little bit and be authentic to who we are, we'll mostly be disruptive enough in the world. We don't have to go, I need to find something and I'm going to be really disruptive. That freedom to live authentically in the world is a great one. Yeah,
it's a good one.
One of the things I picked up from the language of healing was not only the freedom to do that, but also the freedom to allow others and to make space for them to be where they are. And so can you guys talk a little bit about the language of healing? So like if you're in a situation and you're with someone and perhaps the way you're doing your life is disruptive for them, do you have any thoughts on how to navigate those kind of conversations?
I have something, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I have a very close personal relationship that I disagree with a lot on, mainly on like faith-based topics, and it's just really hard to kind of find common ground. But in my relationship with this person, my language of healing is just being consistent and patient and letting that person hold their opinions while still challenging them. And it has been literally so effective. Like, we may be moving at the pace of a snail, but the fact that he can now just say like simple statements like, oh yeah, that does sound like that's probably racist, or oh yeah, well maybe that thing that I said could have been problematic. Whereas, you know, a year and a half ago, it was like, no, not me. I could never have this viewpoint, or like, no. And just for me, part of my language of healing is being able to say like, this is not an attack and you're not the only person who's having these thoughts or feelings. I am also in the wrong. And being able to speak really candidly, I think, is one of the most effective ways to bring the language of healing, because it doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like I'm working on this and you're working on this, and together we can find some common ground. Even if it's this much space, I think we will continue moving forward into like a better language of healing.
That's good. I like that, looking for where we can begin to stand. I think oftentimes, even I think it was Javon was saying earlier about being, you know, your whole family stated their opinions and they're saying, okay, now what do you think about this? And it's kind of a setup, because you know you're probably, they already know you're probably the polar opposite. I find in times like that, finding the provocative question to ask them to make them think, not the setup question that's kind of like too easy and everybody knows you think you have the right answer, but a real question that gets them to think beneath the level of their superficiality. And that to me, asking questions, looking for whatever that common ground is that we can find, not having to get them to the end zone, maybe move them 3 yards further down whatever field they're on, is helpful. And asking a question to me is a way to really disarm. Owning our own failures, that's a part. Owning our own growth, giving them space to grow. Those things are really helpful, I think, in navigating these awkward moments with people.
You know, it's funny that we call those moments awkward, because they're really not awkward. If you invite me into a conversation, like if I was in Javon's family, and you invite me to respond, I'm going to challenge you when you have the gall to tell me how to respond. Because that's what I mean by people not allowing different narratives, especially when you invite me into it. Right. Why did you invite me to speak into that if you need to shape my story? So that in and of itself, if people can take a nugget about personal disruption, that's one. When you get so torn up, figure out.
We've lost you, Arnita.
Of her life, but I've never experienced it before in my life. So
somebody needs to give Arnita a voice. It's hard to understand all you said there.
I'll have to dub her. What I heard through all of that was.
You'll have to edit it. My bad.
No, that's okay. You're in a hotel. But what I heard from that, and what I'm hearing, and I'm still struggling with this too, is there's a sense of when even your own story is to be able to own that and get comfortable. Kind of, we've all kind of talked about a little bit about, to where you're comfortable with that, but also open-minded. You know, I think there's some humility that's required in these kind of conversations. It must be. I'm assuming there has to be some humility to make space for other people, and to be open to learning and growing, and to wanting to be a peacemaker, not a peacekeeper.
Right. Let me, can I jump in on this?
Yeah.
Three people, or three groups of people that I have admired in my life that are disruptors are, of course, Jesus, the Beatles, and Bob Dylan. Completely disruptive, especially the way that they dealt with authority. The religious leaders would try to trip Jesus up. You know, so what do you think about divorce? And he always, you know, he knew how to disarm and in real time confound who they were. The Beatles were exactly the same way. They'd get asked a question and they'd answer something else. Bob Dylan, the same way. And so I've always admired those who are able to push back on authority respectfully, but successfully, because disruption requires exactly that.
I don't think I've ever heard Jesus compared to the Beatles before. That's first.
Come on.
It would be Bob to do that.
It would be Bob.
All right, Wayne, I do have a question for you. So those who resist disruption, you often will talk about power, money. Can you talk a little bit about why sometimes people in authority or perceived authority will try to hold the status quo? How you see that?
Well, usually benefiting from it. People who hold the status quo, they like it because they benefit from it. When I did negotiations with bridge builders and we'd help school districts deal with issues, I said, two people I don't want in the room. I don't want paid advocates from Focus on the Family or ACLU, some group left or right. I don't need a paid advocate in the room because they're getting paid for the problem. They're not getting paid to fix it. Their future is guaranteed by keeping whatever problem we've got going. Politicians, the same way. I had a school board president tell me one time, or a school board member. He said, listen, I know what's right to do here legally. I need a judge to order me to do it to protect me from my constituents. Because he was more worried about his political popularity than he was worried about doing the right thing in the room. And and Paul's wife may be an exception to this, but I don't know too many politicians who don't put their popularity and electability above doing the right thing, even when they know the right thing to do. So when I'm advocating in those kinds of groups, I say, look, get the people out of it that are making money or re-election campaigns off the fight. I've always said when people ask me about, I wrote a paper with a rabbi about the conflict in Israel and particularly within Israel, would a First Amendment work in Israel? And it was a paper I did with some doctoral guy a long time ago. And I got asked after that, how would you solve the Middle Eastern crisis between the Palestinians and the Jews? And I said, here's how I'd solve it. I'd get 12 Jewish moms and I would get 12 Palestinian moms and I'd put them on an island with a few experts they could ask questions about. And I bet they'd solve it in a week because they don't have a dog in the fight. They don't have to make money off of it. They don't have to get elected next time. They're just going to care about their kids and what the society's doing to them. When we got rooms of people, peacemaking is very disruptive. When I walk into a room and there's 30 advocates on this, or 15 advocates on this side and 15 on this, and I start proposing a different solution that is disruptive to both because both have come to the room to win. When they finally see through it and accept the premise of a common ground, let's do something for our mutual good, not my good at your expense, but our good, your good, and mine together. I've watched people do the most amazing things, now the most amazing conversations. So I know this is doable. You just got to have people in the room who don't have a dog in the fight in the sense that they have to make money off of it or make their living or make their reelection off of it.
That's good. All right, well, we just have a couple more minutes left, and I'm wondering if anybody on the panel, anybody want to talk?
No, we lost Tracy.
Me?
Say again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I said we have a couple more minutes left, and I'm wondering if there's anybody who has something they haven't said that they want to say before we close up.
I think I wanted to kind of just touch on lightly, making sure that we understand this era we live in. So as I look, because I serve this area, and this is the area that I serve in the community and in the streets in the city. And one of the biggest problems is not from our side, for those that help, they're not making enough of an effort to understand where people are at right here, right now, because there's so much disgust with where we're at right here, right now.
Right.
And sometimes it's really, it's discouraging to see where we're at, like modern social media marketplace, where everyone is right, but no one's studied, where everyone's an expert, but no one has experience, where everyone has an opinion, but no one's involved, where, you know, people want to loot TVs, but they don't want to help lobby and advocate. This is the era that we're in, and it's guaranteed to get worse because this is where people would rather get their information from. So it calls for us to not only be really, really, really rooted and grounded in what we believe, but we also have to make an effort, a legitimate effort, to understand where they come from, to understand their background, to understand their communication, to understand how much, I think Steve Stout calls it the tanning of America, where America has this tanning over it because of these cultural additives to it, such as hip hop, such as these are huge things in the marketplace that have affected how people talk and act and dress and think and look. Mm-hmm. And some of that rebel behavior has come as a result of things like hip hop that is rebellious, of things, not to say it's the devil, but to say that this is a popular thing in this culture. So having to understand and getting more information about who we serve, wanting to actually know, as opposed to saying, hey, come over here, I want to give you a bunch of wisdom, which that never works out, but asking questions and asking them, who are they and where are they from and how are they impacted and how they perceive will give us a better opportunity to bridge the gap, and our wisdom can fall on ground that is good. So that's important to me.
And I think, Carolyn, you had something to say.
Yeah, just to follow up with what Wayne said, I'm the money girl. I teach biblical financial principles. I'm a financial coach. An interesting thing is when you're disruptive, you're basically saying, I'm not going to be controlled. And individuals that have money and that have access to the purse strings of whatever that is, whether it's your paycheck, they want to control you. They don't understand that you can't pay everybody off to keep them quiet. You can't stop people from making the statement. You can't settle out of court all the time because there's an unreal expectation, an unreal understanding that money is the main driver for most people. When you move into where you have the courage to be disruptive, you're basically saying, no, money is not it. You don't have to keep me in your club. You don't have to keep me in your organization. You're not going to control me. So money is the main thing that a lot of people think that they can use to control you. For those of you that have a disruptive call on your life, do not let money control you.
I like that. I think that's a great point. Okay, anybody else have something on their mind or heart?
You know, I would just say for me, I think knowing my audience is important and my purpose, you know, and when I look at how Jesus did his disruption, and I love the story of the rich young ruler that it says in one of the versions that Jesus looked on him and he loved him. And then he told him a hard truth. And when the rich young ruler started walking away, he didn't go, no, wait. You know, like, yeah, you know, the Samaritans are bad too. And the tax collectors, you're not any worse than those guys. No, he just said, that's the truth. And if you can't handle it and you're going to walk away, you're going to walk away. And then he turns to his buddies and says, man, easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than that guy to enter the kingdom of heaven. And so sometimes we've talked about what it cost and losing friends and all of that. You just have to know who the audience is. And so, you know, I'm speaking out in my sphere of influence and people always go, why don't you criticize the other side too? And it's like, because they're not my audience. That's not my sphere of influence. I'm talking to my people. And sometimes it is going to come off as harsh, but it's true to who I am. I think we have to just stay true to who we are and who we're supposed to be and who we're speaking to, and not be afraid if that group says, nah, we're walking away from that, and just let them walk away.
Okay. All right, Bob, Arnita, Wayne, any final thoughts?
Well, we want to say thank you to you, Tracy. You kind of act like you're a pro at this, and convincingly so. I appreciate everybody being here today. This, as always, a kick in the pants, and I learned something every time we have one of these panels. Wayne, Arnita, you have anything? Can't hear you, Wayne.
Wayne, you went out. Oops.
No.
Nope.
No.
He just said he loves you guys so much.
That's what I heard.
And that he's ready to write another book with you.
I heard that too.
And it's going to be written at my house. That's what he said.
Why should this one be any different?
No different.
Like Wimberley, we're coming to Wimberley. You know, I would think of something. Always keep in the back of your mind that
Something that's disruptive to you is probably an area that you champion.
Wait, you went out. Something that's disruptive to you.
It's probably something that you champion.
Champion.
You tend to be disruptive in areas that you champion.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's always a real good gauge for. It's always a good focal way to get you focused, because you will disrupt something you care about deeply. Disrupt.
And that's kind of where you started, Arnita, in the beginning when you said can be really positive. That's such a positive.
Right.
Am I back now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I want to make an announcement before we go. Just got word during this Zoom call that the conversation guide for the language of healing shipped from the printers today. So they should be out in a week or so and around and available. So for those of you that are looking for a conversation guide to help walk through the various chapters of this book with a group, either online or in your home or however, that resource will be available. You can pre-order it from Amazon, and should happen shortly.
Well, let it be.
Hey, that's awesome.
And if you want them in quantity, order from Blue Sheep Media. They're selling 10 of them in packets at quite a bit cheaper than the going rate. So.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Tracy.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Until
Thanks
the
for
next
being
time.
here. Bye.